let's get started with a short tutorial on introduction to animation, kind of. This one was prompted by a friend, and what he sent me is a sort of a storybook or a script showing a very short animation sequence here, where you have something that looks like the sun or the moon painted over 3 frames, and it needs to appear in the upper left corner, pretty small initially, on this gray background, and then get bigger, and still is in the upper left corner, but then eventually kind of moves into the center and goes to be full screen, full size. Now we have a view at some of the assets here, so there are some other frames that will be needed, also other parts to this finished animation at some point. There are some other storyboard elements here. This one here in particular of interest. This one is showing a scan of a hand-drawn image, the sun or the moon, and unfortunately it's a little bit cropped on the side. It's not a perfect scan because part of the image is missing along the right side here. If you zoom in, you can see that it's just not perfect. We would probably want to rescan that, but we can also actually use Dog Waffle to perhaps reconstruct some of the missing pieces. And I wanted to therefore really do 2 parts to this tutorial. One is to show how to fix this and how to turn this into an asset that we will then use in the second part as an animation element. So let's start with this. Initially we'll go and load or open this image that contains the sun or the moon or whatever you want to call it. It could be a picture of a cat, a dog, or whatever. And let's go and open that JPEG image in this case. And let's go and have it replace the current image. Alright, so we don't have an animation anymore, just have a single image right now, and it is pretty big actually. If I show it at 100% here, you can see it's zoomed in all the way, and that's quite typical when you scan a picture. You might have it scanned at 300 dpi or something similar to that, and it ends up being a fairly high resolution image, probably much bigger than what you really need if you want to animate that, right? Because I mean, in the end, during the animation, only at the very end will it be about this big. Most of the time it will be significantly smaller, and on top of that, the whole video, the whole animation is going to be some sort of a high definition, maybe 1280 by 720. This one's much bigger already. If you look at the image here under image info, you can tell the buffer width, that's the size, the dimensions of this image. It's 2550, that's in pixels, 2500 pixels, and the buffer height is 3000. So even if you were to rotate that, let's do that, image rotate. Where do we do that? There's a rotate option here, clockwise or counterclockwise. Even if we do that, it's now it's horizontal, it's landscape in its format, but it's still a very large image, right? 3300 pixels wide. So one thing I would do probably as we work with this, first of all, would be simply to make it a little bit smaller. And so under the image menu, let's go and resample that. Right, the image size is something different. We'll get to that too, but let's first resample it to make it smaller, perhaps by clicking on the half size here, and you see now it's 1650 by 1275. That might still be bigger than what we really need, but we could use that as a starting point. So let's use that. And now, you know what? Even there, yeah, too big. Let's make it a little bit smaller. So one more time, image, resample, and this time, let's see if we make it half that size, it will be about 825. I think that's good. Now, if you want it to be an even number, which especially for video is a good idea, why not just actually entering it here, maybe 800. Right? At least then it's an odd number, excuse me, it's an even number now, and it's a power of 4 or 8, which will work for video even better. If you make your videos odd number, it always can be a very tricky thing. So let's go and store this one here. Let's store an image copy. Now this is not saving it on file, So you're not totally safe here if the program were to crash, or if you had a power outage and run out of battery on your laptop. You will want to save that in a file every once in a while. But one thing we wanted to do is add a little bit of room around it so we can patch up those areas that are cut off. Here at the top it's not too bad, just a little bit in this area. But at the bottom we have a couple of rays missing, those sun rays. We need to expand a little bit here. So let's use this other tool, this other option from the image menu. It's called image size, and that will allow you to expand the placeholder for the image. You see right now this represents the anchor, which is like where the image is, and you could say on which side you want to add some space around it. What I'm going to do is keep it in the middle and simply make the width a little bit bigger horizontally. We don't need much more sideways, but even here on the left side there's a little bit of a cutoff, so it's good to give a little bit of a margin around it. Let's say 840 would be a good size here, but definitely in the height we need to have a little bit more, especially at the bottom. So let's make that one 800 vertically. Now it's going to fill it with the white color here by default. It's the background color or the secondary color that you see here also in the color selectors. And what we really need to do, of course, is have it filled with the gray that we have here. The trick with that, though, is that it's not just a single color. It's got some grain to it. And there are a couple of ways to try to mimic that. Because if you just give it a plain gray, it's going to look like it has a sudden cut or a transition. And herein lies one of the tricks, is how to best fill this thing here with the same gray and granularity, the grain that you have there. Now, one way you could do that, especially here on the right side, there's a good chunk all the way from the top to the bottom without the sun rays, and we can capture that. I would use, for instance, the rectangle selection tool here, rectangle to alpha, and by the way, if you're not familiar with the navigation that I'm using here to zoom in and zoom out and move around, I'm using the control and the shift key with my left hand, and then I can use the left button while I hold the control and shift key to move the image around, or the right button sideways to zoom in and out. And so that's an important navigation tool that I really encourage you to practice and become familiar with, so you can easily focus on the area where you want to paint or do something like a selection that I'm about to do. If you don't want to use the keyboard shortcuts, Control Shift, you can also do that here with the hand. Scroll around image, you just place it around like this, you click and drag right from this tool. So you don't click and then go over here to start dragging, you just click and drag directly from here. The moment you click, the hand will jump to the center of the screen and you can actually start moving around. Another one, same thing here with the zoom, click and drag and that will do the zoom relative to the center of the screen. So if you wanted to look at the upper right corner, you click and then drag it down to the lower left so the upper right corner appears, and then you can start zooming in, same way. I just think that it's really much nicer to use the Control Shift key in one hand and the mouse left and right button with the other hand. Alright, so that said, what we'll do is we'll zoom it so that we have a clear shot at this band on the right side, and we'll use the rectangle selection tool to get about most of it here. So we click and drag this marquee selector, so now see the marching ants, as we call it, the selected rectangle area, and I'll pick this up as a brush. Use the selected as brush. Right, use selected as brush. That picks it up, and you may not see it too well, but it actually now, if you turn this PRV on or off here, you can see that it turns the preview of your custom brush on. You can turn the opacity to the maximum, and so now you can see that there it is, and if you were to place it just next here, it might just blend in perfectly. Even better if you actually flip it sideways, like along the horizontal. Let's go brush, flip horizontal, then you actually kind of have a mirror copy here, and it's mirroring it, and it will not be looking like that there is a seam or something. But you know what, let's not worry too much about making it perfect. Just clip it down there once, stamp it down, so that will fill in the gap that was in white. And we can use it also here on this side. Now it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be much better still than if we just filled it with a plain color. Right, so clearly we have a little bit of a missing part here, but and a little bit of a seam, you can tell, but we can fix that and catch up with that a little bit later. Let's for now store this brush just like we stored the image earlier. Under the brush menu, store and manage a copy of this, and this is the brush in a vertical layout. Let's go rotate it. You can do that here if you want to work from this one, or you can take the current loaded brush and rotate it by 90 degrees. And so now we have a version that's horizontal that we can place around here. Now here we need to make it bigger, right? So what I'd like to do, let me move this over here. What I'd like to do is either stamp it here a couple of times until the whole area is filled, but that also will lead to a couple of artifacts that I might not want to see. Yeah, you can tell there are some, let me turn the PRV off temporarily. You can tell that there are some horizontal bands showing because it's not an even color. So one thing I'd like to do perhaps instead is make this brush a little bit bigger. Let's go back and undo until we have this original white band again at the top, and enable the preview again. And then this time I'll use my stored copy and make it bigger and say let's make it 200%, twice as big. Well, that's still the vertical one, so I need to rotate it. In fact, this time let's do the rotation right from here and rotate it to I guess 90 degrees is what we need exactly. So let's use the fine tune. There, now it's 90 degrees, and that's not quite big enough yet, but it's better. And what I'll do is I'll stamp it down once here and the second time about here. All right, so that's not perfect, but in a way it will give us an opportunity to see how can we get rid of that seam. In fact, let's talk about that right now. Let's go and look at these predefined brushes, and you'll notice, for instance, that there are some effects brushes to smear things. Those could be a starting point, but when you have texture, it's not the perfect thing. Yeah, it could be enough for what we need. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect anyway, because we will make all this background transparent eventually. What we want to do is really focus at some point on the sun. So I can use this to get a little bit of, getting rid of that seam and then not worry about it too much. Remember, the whole reason why I have to do this is that the initial scan was not perfect, and it cut off a portion of the image. Ideally, what you do is just rescan it, and you don't have to do all that. So let me look at another way we can do that as well. I'm going to go and paint it down here as well, and at the bottom. So here we have a little bit more problems, right? Here is, let's turn the preview off. Here is definitely a place where the rays will have to be reconstructed, the sun rays, and we'll have a look at how to do that. But let's see how we can perhaps also blend this thing a little bit better. What I would like to do is grab a portion of this image and stamp it down here, right? So what I'll do is I'll actually use the selection tool here, like the ellipse to alpha or the lasso tool, to draw a small selection. There you go, that's now the marching ants. And in fact, you can also see it under the selection menu. If you enable the overlay alpha, you can see purple is not selected and original color shows where it is still selected. And what you can do then, or let me redo that with the ellipse to alpha. Actually, I'll use this way. Okay, so I'm selecting a small circle there, roughly, or an ellipse, an oval, and I'm going to now blur this selection a little bit so that it's not too crisp of a transition from selected to non-selected. I'm going to use, for instance, the Gaussian blur or the box filter alpha and adjust this just so there is a little bit of a softness to it. If you show the alpha here, it will show you you don't want it totally crisp, you want a little bit of a soft edge on it, just tiny little bit. And the reason is that you really want to not have a very crisp edge on that as we pick it up as a brush. You want to have a sort of a soft transition to that. And so now you can go and use this as the brush. You can either do that this way, or you can use the custom brush pickup tool. And that one, you'll just give it a little bit of margin around it, click and drag with the marquee, and select about this much. So now you have a custom brush pickup that you can store from the brush menu. And you can see what it has now. It doesn't just have a plain gray image, it actually has that little granularity there too, and that's really what we wanted. Let's go clear the selection. We don't need it here anymore, and we can now paint with this. Let's enable the preview so we can see the brush. There it is. Right, sometimes difficult to see because it's the same pattern as we are going to paint over, but now we can go and stamp this down here. So we can start to get rid of that seam as I'm clicking, and gradually reconstructing the sky background with about the same granularity as we had on the original sky. The one at the bottom actually shows a bigger grain because I had scaled up the brush image. This one here, I had scaled it up, remember, 200% right there, and that made the granularity, the grains, a little bit bigger. All right, so this is good enough. You know, we don't need this, again, we don't need this to be perfect, just good enough that we can later pick our brush, our sun as a single object. Now, with transparent background. So we need to do one more thing, which is to reconstruct some of these rays here. And I'm going to just show another selection technique. Let me find a place where maybe this one here, or this one here horizontally. Okay, I'm going to grab this, a copy of this little white area here. So let's go minimize this, minimize this. What I'd like to do is really pick this area here as a custom brush, and again, one way I can do that is if I zoom in, I could use the lasso tool and roughly select about this much. Right, go along this spike here, and perhaps grab a little bit of the area back here, the dark area as well. In fact, let me use the shift key to add to it. And if I did go too far, I can right click, I can shift and right drag to remove a section from it. That's definitely an important skill you need to develop, is to use the selection tool with the shift key and the left or the right button. Left button to add, right button to remove. Right. So now we have a selection here, and maybe it's too crisp again. Maybe we need to do a little bit of softening along the edges. So one thing I would recommend is, again, with the selection here, you could do the box or the Gaussian blur alpha, and basically show a little bit of a blurring along that, just so that it's not too crisp a transition there. And then perhaps even make it shrink a little bit. If you're afraid that you're going out to the background too much here, you could go to selection, shrink, or grow the other way. Let's do a shrink here and reduce it by 1 or 2 pixels, and that makes it tighter around the actual area of interest. Now this one we can pick up as a custom brush. All right, so if we do that, brush, select custom brush, we now have that image that we picked up into my brush. And again, this is an important asset, so I'm going to temporarily at least save it here to the store and manage copy. And we have this brush now that we can use to reconstruct the sun rays at the bottom here. So we need to rotate that. Let's go rotate it about 90 or exactly 90 degrees, something like this. And we can place it right down here. That's already one, and then maybe actually another one right there. Again, it won't have to be exactly perfect, but close enough. Now we need to rotate it a little bit to the left or to the right. So if we give it like 1-2 notches here, 88 degrees, and then perhaps a few more, you can grab the slider here to go to 81 and see where that would fit, just about there. And then now these are all the same size, and that might look a little bit odd, so maybe you need to also make the size a little bit different. Let's go down to 68. That will probably fit around here, but let's make it also a little bit smaller, so that will be about this much. And see how we basically add some variation to that, and soon enough you will notice that there used to be a cutoff at the bottom here. So you just stamp down a couple more of these. So let's go about 40. I don't know that we have to go to 45 degrees, but about this much is good. And now let's make a couple of a few more here in the other direction. So that would be about 90, 92, 100 degrees, somewhere around here, and perhaps even more, somewhere around here, and also one or two small ones. There. So we now have pretty much the basics of having reconstructed the bottom part where it was partly cut off. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than it was before. So now let's get down to business, and you know, we could do that at the top here too if we did a little bit of too much blurring. Let's now focus on how to pick this sun up as a single image asset with transparent background. Now there are different ways to do that, and one thing that I definitely want is, first of all, store this image. And again, I cannot stress this enough, you need to occasionally save this to file. This is an important amount of time we just spent here creating this. It would be a shame to lose it to a power outage or a bug that crashes or whatever it is. So let's say we want to now select this entire area, including the rays. So one thing we can do is perhaps focus first on the sun in the middle. That one we can easily pick with an oval. Click the oval selection tool, go somewhere in the middle, and start selecting until you see roughly the edge of it selected. And that may take a couple of tries, but that's a good idea here to start. If we pick this up as a custom brush, use the selected as brush, and then store it, you now have a transparent background around it, and you have just the inner part that's solid. That's not exactly what we need, but it's a starting point. Maybe we can use this as an asset too. In fact, I'm going to store this one. So in the browse media, you can see your current brushes, and I have created a category, my own brushes, and you could create a new one here, create folder, and I'm going to call one here, I'm going to create this one here called Steve's Moon. I don't know why I'm calling it the moon. Looks more like a sun to me, but I heard it might be the moon. So here's Steve's Moon, and I'm going to save it. And this is moon without rays. Okay, so this is a safe copy. It doesn't look quite like it here because here it's being dragged and painted with, but we can always click on that to load and select this image again. So that's really why I want to save it. This one is now actually saved to file, and that's a good safe copy to have. All right, so let's go and put this here to the side and undo this. Okay, so now what if we really want to have not just this but with the rays around it? What we're going to do is use a slightly different selection technique. Let me turn the preview off. We will select the outside and then invert the selection so that we actually get to the inside. Selecting the outside, though, we need to first give it a little bit more contrast, and there may be some other ways to do that, but here's what I'll propose. First of all, let's increase the contrast on this image. So let's go to the filter and adjust the value, or the hue saturation value. Probably value has the better choices here, to adjust the brightness and perhaps the gamma or the contrast. And you want to get to a point where you see those rays pretty bright and the background mostly dark and gone. So the rays need to be there. The sun in here is not too critical because we will be able to easily patch it up. But the contrast here is really what we want to work with, so that we have the rays easily bright on the dark background. And we may need to do this a few times, or perhaps use a different filter like adjust curves. That one can also be useful at times. You can get it to stay darker longer, and then suddenly go to bright, and that could be a really good starting point. Alright, so let's store this one under image, store image copy. Again, just so we have a snapshot of it. And now if we want, we can select the background, and it will mostly stay on the background, but there's a couple of gaps here. You can see here there are some parts where it's all black through, and it will probably go into the inside as well. That's not too bad though. We can later override like this selection or add another selection on top. Well, let's see what we get with that. Let's go with the magic wand and click on the background, and sure enough it picks the entire background and leaves in the pink highlight under the selection here, overlay alpha. It shows the pink part which is not selected, and if I want to now actually invert it, that's exactly what I'll do. I'll go to selection, invert alpha. So now we actually have the selection on our sun, on the bright parts. And there probably are no bright parts around here. Well, there may be some that were left, and we would want to clean those up with the paint on alpha brushes. In fact, we'll do that right here as well. We need to fill the gap where the dark part is. That also should be selected. Now, not always, right? I mean, sometimes you'll want it exactly like this. Let me show you this. If I pick this up and store it as a brush, you now have a selection with a gap, this ring around here. That might actually be really cute to have. So let's go and let me go and undo this and say what else we could do though. If we wanted to also select this dark band here, the circle or this ring, what you could do is simply add to the selection. So let's first store the selection. We have a snapshot of store alpha right there. So this shows you the selection you currently have. In fact, you can go and paint a little bit additional details here. You can go and right here paint on it with this one, this little paintbrush, set the size and simply paint on the selection. Right, so you're actually adding to the selection by painting the white area with the left button. If you paint with the right button, it's removing it. So make sure you paint with the left button, and that will simply build out the selection into where you also want it, which is along this dark ring. And that way we actually have the entire sun with the rays and the dark ring and the center, all of it selected. All right, and that's pretty good, you know, for a quick try like that. So let's go replace this selection into the current alpha channel. Click on replace, and let's not lose this. This is valuable. So now we have a selection that contains everything here, and the background is not selected. That one will stay transparent. Now we might want to have it a little bit softer. It's a crisp selection here. The edges are crisp. You know, again, if you invert the selection, you can see here, invert alpha. It's a crisp on or off thing. And in fact, if you change the color behind it, if you clear everything to white, you can see if you clear the background here to white, it's going to be a very crisp transition, and you might again want the selection to actually be more of a soft transition here, perhaps even tighten it a little bit. So let's go and bring it back to the normal mode, invert alpha, so it's now on the inside, and shrink it, right? Or you could have the selection on the outside and grow it. I'm going to shrink it here a little bit, just by 1 pixel, and you can see it kind of goes to the inside a little bit. Then I'm going to blur it, selection and blur, either Gaussian blur alpha or box filter alpha. And again, we can perhaps give it just 1 or 2 subtle pixels here. 1 unit even is enough, but let's do 2 here if we can go. There you go. And that way we get a little bit of softness on that selection. And I think at that point, I have the selection mask I want. I have the sun behind it, but this sun is too high contrast, so I need to bring back the sun that I had earlier, and that would be this one here. Right, so I put this one in. The selection mask is still the good one that I want, and I want the sun, either this one is off, this one is good. That's the one I want, so now I'll pick that one up as a custom brush. So pick this up as a custom brush and store and manage a copy of it. So now we have the sun. It's subtle, you cannot see it too well, but you have the sun with the rays as a custom image with transparent background, or we call that a custom brush. And that one we definitely want to store in our media. So again, click the browse media here, select the folder where you want to save it, and in this case it's Steve's Moon, and I'm going to save this current brush that I have and say this is moon 2 with rays. Okay, so that one is good, and now we can start using this as an asset. So that was the first part of this tutorial. I'll record a second one now to do the animation, but just to give you an idea of how we'll use this, I'm going to pin down the media browser here so I can pick from one brush or from the other. If I pick this one, I can stamp it down. That one has the rays. If I pick this one, that one does not. And so you actually have multiple brushes that you can save as assets like this. And you may want to actually save them also out as a PNG file with transparent background, because maybe you'll load this into another program, such as a video program like Cyberlink Power Director, which I use a lot. And so what you'll do is you'll select the image. You can preview, enable PRV here to see it, and let's clear the image. So here's the image that we have in the brush, and at that point, if we want to save it, we can save it straight from the brush menu and save it here and indicate where we want it and indicate what file we want to give it, and that could be something like a PNG file, and this will be moon or sun because the debate is still open, with rays. Alright, so that one will save that, and if we want the other image, that's the one without the rays, that one can also be saved as an image with alpha. So let's go save that, and now we see this one here already. That's the one we just saved a little bit earlier, and I'm going to now save it with the same file name, but say without rays. Without rays, moon or sun without rays. Okay, so we have two PNG files that we can use as assets for an animation, and let me move on to the next part, which is an introduction to how to animate this.